Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, October 28th, 2015, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Kaahumanu Friday. We have lots of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. I'm looking on the corporate media feed here right now, and in between stories about the blimp. We'll get into that a little bit later. They're talking, apparently the House is getting ready to vote on this budget deal that was put together between Boehner and the White House, and a lot of people are very unhappy with it. Most of all, the American taxpayer, because they're basically taking even the pretense of a limit on borrowing off the government. The government is going to borrow and spend and borrow and spend and borrow and spend. They're going to borrow money to give to Wall Street, borrow money to spend on wars, plunging the nation further into hopelessly unpayable debt. But it's not their problem. You know, it's going to be your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren who are going to have to slave their lives away and turn their money over to the government to pay these bills. And no doubt, I'm sure a lot of supporters about this renewed surge of borrowing on the part of the government is saying, look, we've got all these new immigrants are coming in. They're going to be amnestied. They're going to be given work permits. We've got all these refugees coming in from Syria. We're going to have another 100 million people in this country paying taxes, so of course we can pay back all the debt. Really? You don't even have jobs for all the legal American citizens right now. How are you going to put these new people to work so that they can pay taxes to pay down the debt? Right now, this is a cash-negative situation. With all these people coming to this country, they don't have jobs, they got serious medical problems, they're straining the existing social safety net. Boy, there's something in the water of Washington, D.C., because the quality of thinking coming out of Sodom on the Potomac is not very good. Maybe they're all on prescription antidepressants. They're managing the country with wishful thinking rather than careful analysis. All right, turning over to the war zones, Russian air forces have hit another 118 ISIS targets in the past 24 hours. They're really churning along there. And over at Sputnik News, they have a very interesting and revealing article, The Empire of Chaos is in a Jam. Empire of Chaos being the new name for the United States of America. And they're commenting on this ludicrous suggestion coming out of Washington, D.C., that the U.S. establish a no-fly zone over Syria because they've already got one. Russia put it in place. And Russia's no-fly zone is protected by their jamming systems that absolutely blind anything the U.S. and NATO has. And basically, the U.S., Israel, and Great Britain are very limited in where they can go in to drop bombs on the Syrian people and infrastructure. And remember, Russia is in Syria at the invitation of the government. Iran is in Syria at the invitation of the government. There is no invitation from Syria's government for the U.S. to be bombing and invading and putting boots on the ground in their country. Complicating the situation, of course, is now that Turkey's warplanes are flying along the Syria-Turkey border, firing on the Kurds, who are supposedly on the side of the United States against ISIS. And so it's become a very, very complicated war. You know, they're shifting, good guy, bad guy. Do we kill these people today? No, it's Tuesday. Kill those people over there. It's really absurd. Now, Russia is once again sending a caution to the United States that U.S. troops on the ground in Syria are illegal because they have not been invited in by the Syrian government. There is no United Nations resolution authorizing a U.S. military intervention into Syria. Congress has not issued a declaration of war. The U.S. does not have any business sticking its nose into Syria. Never stopped him before, but we're going to be technically correct on this. Russia is saying the insertion of U.S. ground troops into Syria could very easily lead to unpredictable consequences, meaning the Russians and the Americans accidentally, or maybe even on purpose, start shooting at each other, and we got a full-on war with Russia, which I know a lot of people want, except those who have to pay for it and die in it. They don't think this is a really good idea. Another little article came out of Voltaire Net. The Russian army asserts its superiority in conventional warfare. And basically it comes down, despite the fact that the U.S. spends far more money on their weapons than Russia, the U.S. has lost its military domination in the eyes of the world in conventional warfare. Doesn't matter how good or bad the weapons really are, the public image is very important in trying to project political power with the threat of the military. Now, the U.S. has lost its domination because it spent all that money on rebuilding the weapons that won the last war, such as supercarriers. While Russia and other countries have moved into the 21st century and rethought how wars will be fought. The U.S. has a tremendous propaganda banner about, we've got all these supercarriers, Russia's only got a couple, China's only got one. See, we're superior in carriers. And yet those carriers are very attractive targets, and both Russia and China have developed very potent rockets that are designed to do nothing else than seek out and kill aircraft carriers. Remember that story came out about a month ago. Joint Chiefs called in a Navy admiral. Said, if we go to war with Russia and China, what is the life expectancy of our carrier groups? And the admiral said, 2 weeks maybe, 3 if you keep them in port. So, now then, interesting little story out of Washington's blog. Believe it or not, 57 years ago, the U.S. and Great Britain played this same stunt on Syria before, the use of Islamic extremists to topple the government. Documents have just been discovered or released or leaked. How in 1957, actually, former Prime Minister of Great Britain, Macmillan, and President Eisenhower approved a CIA MI6 plan to stage fake border incidents as an excuse for an invasion by Syria's pro-Western neighbors, then to eliminate the most influential triumvirate in Damascus. They've been mucking about with this country for a half a century. Another article coming out of Global Research up in Canada. Who are the terrorists? U.S. intends direct action on the ground in Iraq and Syria in support of ISIS. Remember only a few months ago, ISIS were the bad guys. They had all those wonderful videos from Rita Katz and Site Intelligence of ISIS killing off the dinosaurs and ISIS tearing tags off of couch cushions and ISIS passing wind in the elevators. They had all that stuff. And now all of a sudden we're supposed to forget all about that because now they're our guys. Russia's attacking our guys and we can't let that happen. Basically, the U.S. has been forced to admit it is a state sponsor of terror. And things just got a little more complicated over in Iraq because Iraq's government has announced, no, we have not asked the United States for ground operations in our country. They do not have our permission or invitation, which isn't going to stop the United States. But once again, the U.S. is acting outside international law, the UN Charter, to go on in there. Iraq doesn't want the U.S. in there. Everybody's pivoting over to Russia. Russia can get the job done. Plus, those in the know understand all this terror threat that we've been dealing with for decades and decades was manufactured by the United States to bring about war, to bring about tyranny and dictatorship. It's all a gigantic fraud. It's like Emmanuel Goldstein out of Orwell's 1984. The government makes the enemy that it uses to scare you into obedience. Now, the Pentagon funding bill is on Obama's desk ready for signature. $600 million to the terrorists operating in Syria. $300 million in offensive lethal weaponry to Kiev. We'll be back. Right. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And the phone lines are loading up, so let's get some phone calls here. Tim in California. Aloha, Tim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I was calling about the recent Ben Carson leading the polls there.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was pretty high on Donald Trump at first, and then I just kind of been studying a little bit of Ben Carson as far as, like, why the big push lately. And, he's kind of the real deal once you start to really, like, dig into him. I mean, and he's funded by the public. All his ideas are,
Well, there's
there's
something, speaking of doing your homework, you need to realize something. Early in her career, Hillary Rodham worked on the Watergate Committee investigating the crimes of Richard Nixon and the Committee to Re-elect the President, which was what Watergate was all about. So Hillary has had an advanced education on how to steal and rig elections, and I'm sure she has taken those lessons to heart. And if you study what CREEP was doing, one of the things they would do was go on out and sabotage and rig the public opinion polls to make McGovern look good and everybody else look bad, because the goal for CREEP was to get rid of every Democratic challenger who might be able to beat Richard Nixon and prop up George McGovern to become the Democratic nominee so that Nixon could basically steamroller over him, which is exactly what happened. Now, the suddenness with which Carson was thrust into the lead in this one poll in Iowa seems suspicious, because Trump is still polling well ahead of the pack in all these other polls. They're cherry-picking the polls to make Carson look better and Trump look bad. It's a repeat of the same things we saw being done to Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. I'll be very honest. I absolutely have no confidence that this poll showing Carson in the lead is accurate. I mean, we know how bad election fraud is in this country, and there's far less security and double-checking on opinion polls.
Yeah, but I'm just saying him as a candidate. I mean, he's, I don't know if you've watched any of his speeches or anything.
I don't think he can beat Hillary. I don't think he can beat Hillary. Trump can beat Hillary. The polls are showing that. I don't think Carson can beat Hillary.
I just think, people are tired of regular politicians. He's a doctor. He's never been a politician.
Okay, you're obviously pro-Carson, and that's fine. And I'm pro-Trump. You're okay. Anyway, listen, the phone lines are loading up. I got to let you go. Thank you for the call. We're going to switch over here to Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. There's been some reports floating around on media about Russian subs possibly severing underwater cables. It's more of this Russia could do this, Russia could do that, Russia could have a Death Star. And it's just, it's just Russia bashing to try and get everybody to forget that Russia was invited to be in Syria by the Syrian government and the U.S. government was not. So we're seeing all this stuff about Russia's doing this, Russia could do that, and even warnings that there may be a false flag staged over Syria where a U.S. plane and pilot gets sacrificed and it's blamed on the Russian air presence. So we've seen all this before, and we recognize it when we see it. I mean, the original article that put out that story about Russian subs and cables said right in the body of the article, there's absolutely no evidence Russia's doing this or planning to do it. They're just hoping people will read the misleading headline and go away, and that's what they're thinking. That's one of the dirty tricks of the corporate media, is they'll write an inflammatory headline, and then in order to avoid being charged with misstating what's going on, they'll bury down in the rest of the article about, we don't actually know what's happening, it's just a concern. Okay. Yeah, I mean, anyone can really see that happening.
Yeah.
And you see what's happening with the U.S. They're getting embarrassed with ISIS, what Russia's doing to ISIS, and they see the other countries, seeking Russia's help. They're in a desperate situation, so they're looking for anything that grasps.
Well, there's a possibility that the U.S. could cut the cables so that Americans no longer have access to independent media in other countries. But there's no point for Russia in cutting the commercial undersea cables because the U.S. military has satellite links. Russia has their own hardened communication system. What they're talking about are the commercial cables that carry telephone calls, TV shows, and, of course, Internet access.
Oh, yeah, and I think they float that out there on purpose so people will be aware that, and when something does happen, let's suppose the U.S. does cut the cables, they're going to say, well, yeah, they did say that Russia had a probability that they might do so. So
remember back in 2001, starting in August, our media was just full of Osama bin Laden, terrible, terrible person, horrible person, be afraid. And it was so heavy-handed and obvious. I was still writing over at Free Republic at the time, and I posted an article saying, this isn't news. This guy hasn't done enough to warrant this kind of saturation news coverage. This is a sales pitch
we're being set up. Something bad is going to happen, and this guy's going to get the blame for it, at which point I was banned from Free Republic.
Is there any truth, not to get off the subject, but is there any truth to that Trump quote from his book about him predicting 9/11, where he said something along the lines where there's going to be a big attack and, Well,
a lot of people were predicting that something was going to happen. I mean, Trump is supposedly looking at Richard Gage's information on 9/11. And Trump has already come out and said, obviously George W. Bush is responsible to some degree in that it was his job to prevent it from happening. Whether Trump will step over the line to say that he doesn't think Osama bin Laden and the accused Saudis and the rest of those people didn't do it, I don't know. In an election year, he's still having to court Israel's support, or at least try and prevent Israel from using their control of the media from damaging any more than they really are, that they already are.
Say what you want. Trump is smart for using the 9/11 against Jeb Bush to his advantage.
Trump is a smart guy. He's made himself rich by his own hands, and that's something he's got none of the other candidates have. The other candidates were all made rich by people they did favors for. Trump earned his money. He's made and lost several fortunes, and he knows how to make business work, which is something else the rest of the candidates do not have. Anyway, Steve, I got to let you go here. The phone lines are really loading up here today. And actually, I don't have time enough to take another phone call, so I'm going to ask all of you to wait patiently. We're coming up on a 4-minute commercial break. I've never seen the phone lines loaded up this much. In my entire time here, we've got all but one line filled up right now waiting for phone calls. Okay, before we hit the commercial break, Iran's invitation to the Syria talks marks a significant shift for the U.S. and allies. Up until now, anytime there's talk about a political resolution in Syria, Iran was blocked. Now opposition to Iran has dropped, and that is a major political victory for Bashar al-Assad. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Boy, the phone lines are just absolutely jammed here. And we're going to start here with James in Ohio. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I've been reading your site since the days of libertyforum.org, so it's been quite a while. But there were a couple news items you may not be aware of. Hillary is taking a firm stand in support of the DARK Act, against GMO labeling, and she said we have to pass it to know what's in it.
Well, that seems to have become a common theme in Washington, D.C. I mean, we got the same thing from Pelosi about Obamacare, a bunch of these other things. No, your job as members of the Congress is to fully read and understand what you're voting on. And
it's a double entendre.
Yeah, well,
you have to pass it to know what's in it.
Yeah.
And the 247 soldiers that their remains were dumped in a landfill. They're going to, the DOD is on this, and they're going to rename that landfill the Tomb of the Really Unknown Soldier.
Oh, God.
And in the future, as tests have already shown, they're going to make sure this doesn't happen anymore. They're going to simply deliver the remains to hot dog manufacturers.
That's over the line. Well, yeah, you're right with the human DNA being found in hot dogs. Are they getting it from Planned Parenthood, or are they just have very clumsy workers falling into the machinery and they don't bother shutting it off?
Maybe alternative doctors or political dissidents or 9/11 researchers. But one serious thing I wanted to mention, as far as why they are so hard on pushing vaccines, there's a documentary called Butterflies and Monster Salmon. And in the documentary, they say that chickens wanting to brood after they lay eggs was a problem. So they genetically engineered this desire out of chickens. Well, there are any number of ways to introduce things into vaccines and thus into people.
Yes.
That could make us more docile, like monoclonal antibodies or viral vectors.
I'm sure they're already looking at ways. I mean, they already developed an experimental vaccine
that was going to make Muslims less religiously fanatical. I mean, they're talking about messing around with the brains here. To stimulate loyalty, to suppress doubt and skepticism.
The BMAT-2, but one problem was the mice that they developed with a knockout gene that didn't produce BMAT-2, they all died. That was the fundamentalist vaccine, but I'll let you go. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here, and we're going to switch over to Jeff in Minnesota. And I'm sorry if I've got these out of order here. We're trying to get through these all fast. Jeff, what's on your mind?
On your blog, you have mentioned a lot BEX alert. What's that?
It's short for bovine excrement, and it's something the members themselves started, meaning nonsense, junk, propaganda warning.
Okay, thanks a lot. See you next time.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. We're going to let you go and switch over to Tom in Maryland. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mr. Rivero. I have some bovine excrement for you.
Okay.
You remember talking about our eyes in the sky. Actually, I think there was only one up at the time. I'm calling from Maryland, of course, where in my former almost backyard up in Aberdeen at Proving Grounds, they had these giant blimps. Well, apparently their incompetence or sabotage, something went wrong today. One of them got loose, almost made it to New York. It's long cables taking out power lines in Pennsylvania along the way. 2 F-16s chasing it, didn't know whether to shoot it down or not. It did touch down 2 counties short of New York. So it's caused quite a bit of havoc, and they're trying to keep people away right now so they can recover their top-secret equipment.
Oh, yes, another fine product from the U.S. military-industrial complex.
How about that? Well, I thought you'd be interested. It was quite a spectacle to see this high-tech equipment gone array and astray, and them seemingly not having any idea what to do about it. By the way, I thought you did an excellent job on the Joyce Riley show the other day.
Thank you.
I had to laugh at the end when you got real, and boy, I didn't know if she was going to be able to catch her breath. She made a quick recovery. It's funny to see how people react when they have hard facts in front of them, but I think she just got a little nervous. She usually doesn't tiptoe around those things too much, but when you laid it out, I think you probably could tell yourself she got a little nervous at the end. But
yeah, but, you know, Netanyahu opened the door with his own Holocaust revisionism. Oh, it's the fault of the Palestinians, and we're all laughing at him. And, yeah, he opened the door. Of course we're going to go on through. Of course we're going to take advantage of it. Because now the whole world knows Israel lies about the Holocaust for political gain. That's what we were all just taught. Okay?
You know, the laws against talking about it, I think, were the thing that gave it away for sure. That was just absolutely the thing that put the bullseye on it for me. So, anyway, good interview.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot here, and we're going to let you go and grab Matt in Tennessee. Aloha, Matt. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, thanks for taking my call, Michael, and what's on my mind is globalism. You know, I'm a former professional rodeo cowboy. I was a member of the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association 9 years, and I competed in the IPRA. And what's happened here recently is the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association, which is a corporate entity, regardless of it is. It's corporate driven. Has signed an agreement with the Mexican Rodeo Federation. And all of your listeners and you yourself, Michael, can go to prorodeo.com. It's the website of the PRCA. And go ahead and look at this. And if you read the article, you'll see that Carl Stressman, the commissioner of the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association, at this time, is, saying that he wants to have more rodeos in North America. And of course, there's Kissimmee, Florida involved, where they have the National Circuit Finals, and also, the Secretary of the Economy of Chihuahua government.
Okay, Matt, we're running out of time on this, we're running out of time on this segment, and you know, rodeos and sporting events in general are not something that we normally devote a huge amount of time to when we're in the middle of trying to stop a world war. But I thank you for the information, and we're going to let you go and try and fit in Jeffrey in Texas before the commercial break. Jeffrey, what's on your mind?
Yes. Hi, Michael. Hi, Mike. I like what you do. I like your show. It gives a lot of truth to people that really don't know much about history or the truth. But I would like to talk about the immigration subject. It's very disturbing to see and to hear people talk about the immigrants like it's their fault that we don't have any resources.
No. Nobody is saying that. Nobody's saying that. What we're saying is the immigrants and refugees are putting an additional burden on our resources, and that is absolutely unequivocally true. Jeffrey, we ran out of time, and I'm going to have to let you go. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be back with one more phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And with regard to Iraq, pointedly saying that the United States does not have permission from Iraq's government to have troops on the ground, things just got a little bit stickier because the United States has just struck and killed 22 Iraqi troops in an airstrike. And once again, somebody got it on video, U.S. planes are dropping weapons and supplies to ISIS. So everybody knows what the fraud is. And I think Iraq is probably within the next couple of days going to revoke their permission, retract their invitation to the U.S. to be in Iraq at all. And so the U.S. is going to be in a very difficult propaganda position of convincing you, the American people, who are expected to pay and bleed for it all, that even though it's a violation of international law and the UN Charter that the U.S. has to invade Syria and Iraq, going to be a tough sell unless they nuke someplace and try and get us all riled up. And according to Ukraine's version of WikiLeaks, there is a plan being discussed between Saakashvili and people in America to shoot down an American plane over Syria and to blame Russia for it. Oh, my goodness, it's Flight 17 all over again. All right, let's grab a couple of phone calls here. John in Barbados, thank you for your patience and waiting all this time. What is on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Yes, I was going to talk about the 22 Iraqi troops killed in Ramadi and 40 of the troops injured. This is the 12th time in crucial battles that the American Air Force has bombed Iraqi troops. This isn't the first time. This is the 12th.
And always it's just in time to turn the tide of battle back toward ISIS.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what I want to say is, I would recommend that the Iraqis corral all the American troops in their bases and keep them in there. And if they don't get out, well, just blast the bases and send the bloody bits home in not in body bags, but in rubbish bags. You know, this has got to stop. It's nonsense. I would invite Russia straight in now. Come on, boys. There's an airfield waiting for you.
Yeah, the Ron Paul Institute for Peace just put up their own version of the story where Iraq is telling Washington, we don't want your help anymore because you're not helping.
This is the help. Yeah, but I mean, I would go to the UN as Iraq and demand that the US withdraw its troops. And as I say, corral the buggers in their bases so they can't get out and put air defense missiles around every American air base and say, you take off, we'll blow you out the sky.
Okay, well, Iraq, and for that matter, Syria, has a problem going to the United Nations because it would take a Security Council resolution to actually order the U.S. out of these military interventions, and of course the U.S. is going to veto. Now, the General Assembly can vote a resolution, but those are non-binding. Like the one they passed, all but 2 votes in favor of ending the U.S. Embargo on Cuba. It's not binding. The U.S. doesn't have to do anything about it. And that's the difference between the General Assembly and the Security Council. Only the Security Council resolutions actually have any teeth to them.
Well, then the recommendation to send those 3,500 home in rubbish bags. Done.
All right. Well, listen, John, anything else real quick? Because I got 2 more calls I want to get to before the news break.
Apart from this Russian offensive, if you like, in Syria, we've been hearing lots and lots of how rubbish this Russian equipment is. Yet there's 40 aeroplanes and managing to sustain 100 or so airstrikes every day.
And they're hitting the right targets, unlike the U.S. planes, which just, golly gee whiz, keep hitting the good guys.
Well, it says a lot about the reliability of this Russian equipment. I don't think F-16s could, 38 F-16s could carry out those numbers.
No, nor the F-15 here. I mean, America's botched weapons development is on full display to the world right now, especially with that blimp that was floating over the East Coast earlier today.
Oh, yeah, taking out the cable.
The electricity and everything. Forget about terrorists and hackers. The Defense Department's blimp has blacked out much of Pennsylvania. John, I'm sorry, I got to let you go. I got 2 more calls I want to get to before the top of the hour news break. Anthony in California, aloha, what's on your mind?
Yes, Mike, hi, how are you?
Fine.
I just wanted, great. I just wanted to add to something that I think you were talking about earlier, immigration.
Yes.
Yes, I don't know if your listeners are aware that the Mexican mafia and the Mexican cartels are running in the state prisons in California.
I would not be surprised. I mean, this open borders policy is an engraved invitation and a red carpet for these really dangerous criminal gangs to just walk on into the United States of America. And a lot of these people are coming across the border with bags of illegal drugs to finance a new start in the U.S. They're carrying, the same weapons our government says we're not allowed to have. It's an absolute ridiculous policy, and the only agenda that makes any sense for any of this is they want to drop all the borders, and they need to sort of blend us all together into one mixed up, jumbled grab bag of ethnic groups, so that we don't have a cultural, regional identity that could stand up to the dropping of the borders.
Well, Mike, that tells me, it should tell people that our California state legislatures and the governor are being bribed from reforming the prison system.
They're being bribed, or they're being threatened. They're being blackmailed. They could be under pressure from the federal government to just leave things the way they are. I mean, the entire system is corrupted from top to bottom. I'm searching in vain for somebody Okay, go ahead. Finish up.
I'm sorry. California is getting, when I heard this was a shock. I mean, the way the prison system is run, I've heard that from somebody who works within the prison system as a guard, he's been working there for 15 years, and he told me that the Mexican mafia is working hand in hand with the Aryan Brotherhood running the state's prison system.
Yeah.
And, it's like, hey, California's becoming a dangerous place to be in.
The entire United States is becoming dangerous. Listen, Anthony, I got to let you go. I'm going to try and squeeze Sam in Montana in. I don't have much time. I'm sorry. I didn't save enough for you. What's on your mind?
Well, could you hold me over?
Yeah, I can hold you over into the next segment here. But I got to cover a lot of news here. All right, so I'm going to put you back on hold. And then when we come back from the news break, I will take your phone call. All right, apparently Russian jets are now striking terrorist positions in Syria right near Israel's border. That's going to make them very, very nervous. And a lot of it has to do with that recent discovery of major oil resources underneath the Golan Heights. Because obviously, once Russia has gotten rid of all these U.S.-Israeli-supported terror groups inside Syria, Syria is going to turn back to recapturing their territory. Now, Israel's out there saying, it's ours, it's ours, it's ours, it's ours. But it's not recognized
by the rest of the world, including the U.S. government. Even the U.S. government does not recognize Israel's ownership of the Golan Heights. It's just another occupied territory, and I'm expecting that Israel will go to war with Syria over that oil. It's a huge, huge prize, and it's going to put the United States in a very embarrassing situation, because the United States is going to have to reverse itself and say, oh, yes, Israel is allowed to take anything they want out of the Middle East here, and then pile on into the war on Israel's side. It's complete and utter chaos out there. Now, there is a bright spot. In Israel, there's a cafe, and they have just launched this policy. If Jewish customers and Arab customers will sit down and eat together, they get a 50% discount on the check. I think that is just great that they're doing that. And probably a lot of people are going to take them up on it. And that's all we need to do. Get everybody sitting down at a table, chatting with each other, and a lot of this would go away. The problem is that everyone has to agree to peace, but it takes only one maniac with a bomb to keep the war going. Are you hearing me, Binny? All right, so we're going to take a break for our top of the hour news. We'll be back with Sam in Montana and more news after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're going to go right to Sam in Montana. Sam, what did you want to talk about?
Yes, I just wanted to share with you and your listeners some gems of gem videos. Well, videos, I call them gems because they're historical gems. I found them on YouTube of all places. One is named Texas in 3 Minutes. Another one was named Mexican Confederates. And then another one was named Mexico is actually in a civil war, which is interesting because I did some research, and I'm kind of up there. I got out of school in the 70s, and it just shocks me that the stuff that we're not taught.
Oh yeah,
it's amazing because it's like if you're not taught stuff, then how are you ever going to be able to fix the mistakes that you caused in history if you're never taught the mistakes of history?
What school does not give you an education. Look at Common Core. What school does is give you only those facts that will lead you to the decisions the government wants you to make. That's the essence of all propaganda. We see it in the corporate media. We see it in the public schools. Thought control. Thought control is not this big science fiction thing with rays or pills or drugs. You control the mind by controlling what it knows, by only giving it that information that will lead a person to decide exactly what they're engineered to decide and think it's of their own free will. Okay?
Yes, exactly, because that Common Core, I did some research on that too. And why would they teach numbers abstractly? It's like 1 + 1 is 2 in every language and in every country. Why does a kid need to know why it's 2? It's like they're trying to teach numbers like letters.
No, what they're doing is they're teaching math skills in a very roundabout, obfuscated way to make kids less able to figure things out. Anyway, listen, Sam, I'm sorry to cut you off. I got to let you go here, and we're going to go ahead and close the phone lines for a little bit. I have got a lot of stuff I need to get to today, and I'm sorry. I try and take every single phone call into the show. Sometimes it's just not possible. I need to get back and get caught up on today's list of stories. Now, J.K. Rowling, who is the creator of the Harry Potter books, movies franchise, came under serious criticism the other day because she came out talking about how she rejects the idea of boycotting Israel, and it drew tremendous response from her fans who are saying, how can you write about the fight between good and evil in the Harry Potter books and then turn around and support the apartheid regime? And J.K. Rowling has issued a clarification saying that she does in fact condemn the brutal Israeli government. What she's rejecting is a cultural boycott, responding to all of these British university professors who are saying we just don't want to have anything to do with Israel, and that's a much, much softer position. So I'm glad that J.K. clarified that, because I was very surprised that she came out with at least how her statement was reported to begin with. Now, speaking of Israel, the violence is continuing to escalate. It's being fanned up. There's open talk of just kicking the Palestinians out and taking over the Temple Mount for the new third temple of Israel even though the archaeological evidence is that the first temple, whatever it was, and it may not have been all that grand, was actually down on Mount Moriah, slightly to the south. But they believe what they believe, and they're going to do what they're going to do. It's so out of control here. An Israeli settler carried out a knife attack against the founder of Rabbis for Human Rights. They're starting to stab each other. And it's just put fully on display Israel's inherent racism. And even Salon.com is saying this has to be a nightmare for Netanyahu, because he's been going on, oh, we're tolerant, we're inclusive, we want peace, and you can see in the streets of Jerusalem, all over the illegal settlements, it's quite the contrary. The Israeli settlers are out there, they want blood. Now, there have been a lot of victims of the Israeli aggressions. More than 60 Palestinians have been killed this month. Far many more injured. A lot of them were kids. 15 were under the age of 18. Women have been targeted by the Israeli occupation forces, including one who was pregnant. And so the women are now saying, look, we've got to have some protection. We're not terrorists. We're not doing anything but trying to live our lives, and we deserve some protection. And what they're getting back from Netanyahu, and we mentioned this in passing yesterday, but I'm going to hit it again today. Netanyahu has basically come out saying that Israel's plan will be to control all of the territories and live forever by the sword. This was quoted in Haaretz. That's Netanyahu's policy. Conquering empire. Rule by the sword. Now, Palestinian President Abbas has called for an international protection regime for Palestinians. He wants UN peacekeepers on the Temple Mount, certainly, and we can expect the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations to go, veto, 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 veto. Now, New Zealand came up with an idea. They're proposing a resolution at the United Nations that is suggesting a trade. Okay? They're suggesting the Palestinians will stop trying to prosecute Israeli politicians and officers for war crimes at the International Criminal Court, and in exchange, Israel will freeze the settlements. And it sounds good, sounds like progress, until you remember that Israel holds the world's record for defying and ignoring United Nations resolutions. That's always been the problem with any agreements or deals. Israel does not abide by them. Now, over in Yemen, as you know, there was another Doctors Without Borders hospital that was bombed. And once again, we're getting the usual flood of stories. Oh, they were shooting at us. The bad guys were there. We didn't know it was a hospital, blah, 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 blah. Doctors Without Borders are saying that, yes, in point of fact, the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen had been given the GPS coordinates of the Yemen hospital. They still bombed it. And adding fuel to the fire, we are now getting a report out of Activist Post that Saudi Arabia has bombed a second Doctors Without Borders hospital in Yemen. Once is an accident, twice is policy. Now, up in Turkey, one possibility for Turkish forces attacking the Kurds, who are supposed to be U.S. allies against ISIS, is Erdogan is coming up for re-election. And he is facing some stiff competition. And he may have decided to go after the Kurds to prove that he's butch and he's strong man and vote him back into power. But apparently he's not absolutely certain that he's going to win election, because he's taken the very draconian, dictatorial, tyrannical step of shutting down the opposition TV station ahead of the election. Just sent the Turkish police in there to shut it on down, pull it off the air, lock everybody in their offices. They're just going to hold them there until the election is over. Now, as you know, China has been very upset with the United States for sending a warship, a guided missile destroyer, within the 12-mile limit around these islands in the Spratlys that China says are theirs. And they're building them up. They're doing a lot of work to build them up. The Philippines claim the islands, but they've never done anything with them. And the U.S. is saying, the Philippines are in Vietnam. They're trying to pick a battle. Beijing has summoned the U.S. ambassador for an explanation. We're hearing that maybe they're going to back off a little bit, because now apparently a top U.S. Navy officer is on his way to China to have discussions about maybe finding a way out of this. On the other hand, Australia has just announced they may send warships to these Chinese islands to up the ante a little tiny bit. Now, turning to the economic news, Putin wants to remove the dollar from Russian trade. In other words, it's going to be banned. And basically says we're not going to take payments for our oil in dollars anymore. That's a big problem for the U.S. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, over in Great Britain, as you know, Prime Minister David Cameron is fully on board with the agenda of bringing Great Britain in as a full member of the European Union. They'll use the euro. They'll be subject to control by Brussels. Other people who are a little more skeptical of the arrangement, they're saying Britain could just go on the way it's going on now, maintaining its own currency and border controls. Could adopt a model more like Norway, which is sort of half in, half out of the European Union, or they could simply split from the European Union completely and go back to being a sovereign state. And Cameron is out there screaming and yelling and wagging his finger, no, our future is in the European Union. Don't you see how wonderful it is? And that's a real tough sell, because over in Great Britain, just like we have the case here in the United States of America, people are being lured to college education with the promise of high-paying jobs. They're encouraged to take out student loans. And when they graduate, they're saddled with all this debt. The jobs are simply not there. So over in Great Britain, Sky News is reporting their emergence of these so-called sugar daddy websites. And basically what it is this is a website where the young, hot college girls will partner up with some rich old guy for companionship as a way to pay their college costs and pay down their student loans. One of these sites, just one, Seeking Arrangement, says they've made 12,600 of these hookups. Now, sex is not mandatory in the deal, but the bottom line is the British government is turning their college girls into hookers to please the bankers. And because the European Union is just going to be more of the same, I think the British people would be better off without it. Even here in the United States of America, back in 2008, when the economy crashed and people were out of work, we actually had U.S. politicians telling American women, you might consider the sex trade. It's okay if you go on out and be a hooker, to pay the bills, because that's all that's important is shoveling the money at the money junkies. Morality, ethics, the health problem, that's just not a factor any longer. And you have to ask yourself, what kind of a country do you live in where your government wants to turn out the girls as streetwalkers? The government's the biggest pimp of them all, along with being the biggest drug smuggler. Now, Volkswagen had to put aside 4.8 billion pounds in advance of the problems they're going to have from this emissions test rigging scandal. And as a result, Volkswagen posted its first quarterly loss in 15 years, which has hammered their stocks a little bit. But I think Volkswagen was targeted because Germany was pulling away from the U.S. and saying, Russia's actually got the right approach in Syria. Because other car makers were caught doing the same thing, European car makers, American car makers, they all got wrist slaps. Only Volkswagen got pounded on. To teach those Germans that you will stay with us against the gosh darn Ruskies. Now, Serbia is accusing the IMF of conducting a little bit of blackmail, because right now the Serbian army is buying Russian weapons, because Russian weapons are less expensive and they actually work. And the IMF is sending out a warning to Serbia and every other country they've got their claws into, that unless you start buying U.S.-made weapons or European-made weapons, that we will cause trouble for you. The IMF is openly threatening Serbia to buy American weapons or face the consequences. Anybody who doubted that all wars are bankers' wars, there's another piece of the evidence for you. Now, as you know, here in the United States of America, they've got this budget deal that is over in the Congress right now. They're getting ready to vote on it. A lot of people are very unhappy with it. It suspends the debt ceiling entirely for a period of, I think, at last word, 2 years. The vote violates another promise made by John Boehner. The budget deal is 144 pages long. And it suspends the debt ceiling beyond when Obama leaves office. The next president coming on in is going to have an open-ended charge card to use, with your great-great-great-grandchildren having to pay that bill. Now then, Ellen Brown, apparently, along with a lot of other people, they picked up on this little graphic I've been putting around about the real question Americans should be asking about the debt ceiling. And so she's got an article out there, how Obama could beat the debt ceiling and leave office as president as a hero. And basically, she says, go back to the practice of the government issuing its own money, as stipulated in Article 1, Section 8. An interest-free currency spent into circulation to buy what the government needs, flowing through commerce without accruing interest to private bankers, taxed back by the same amount at the end to close the cycle. It's a system that works. It's what made the young America an economic powerhouse, which made the young America the instant enemy of all the European banking clans who for 300 years have held humanity in debt slavery through this scam of having a public currency loaned at interest by a privately owned central bank. It is a scam. It's a tool of enslavement. It's rule by debt. And it's no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And like those former failed systems, it only works because you've all been brainwashed to believe this is the way the world is supposed to be. That you're supposed to live your entire life in debt servitude to their most noble personages, the bankers. It's time to become a private central bank heretic and say, I don't believe this is the way we're supposed to live anymore. According to an AP-GFK poll, Americans would prefer a government shutdown rather than increased federal spending. In fact, basically half of Americans say the government should shut down unless they start cutting federal spending. They're spending way too much. Of course, we know where the cuts will be, services that we actually want. The money for the war will go on. Look at the new defense spending bill over there. $300 million in lethal aid to Kiev to kill Ukrainians with. $600 million to the hired terrorists in Syria to kill the Syrian people. That's not what we pay taxes for. It never was. America is not a nation that is supposed to be an aggressor nation. And we wake up and find out that we are. Now, if you've been following the news, you probably already heard Paul Ryan has now been officially nominated for Speaker of the House, and he's been voted in, and as soon as Boehner steps down, Paul Ryan will be the new Speaker of the House. We got to take a break for commercials. We will be right back, and we're going to go ahead and open up the phone lines. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. I'm looking at Fox News right now, and their big banner headline is The War Against ISIS. And they're quoting Secretary of Defense Ash Carter as saying that, yes, the U.S. is going to start ground operations in both Syria and Iraq. And the Fox News commentators are acknowledging that there is a little bit of a hiccup in that the legitimate government of Syria and the legitimate government of Iraq are saying, we don't want you here. And they're trying to get around it by saying, well, this is really not a legal issue or even a moral or ethical issue. This is politically necessary. They're trying to find some way to get you, the American people, to go along with outright invasion of Syria to get rid of Assad and a new invasion of Iraq to get those pesky Iraqis back to obeying U.S. orders. We're the aggressors. They can't figure out a way to sell that to the American people, but the U.S. is the aggressor in this new world war. We're the 21st century version of the Nazis. Got concentration camps, torture, starting wars with lies. And I'm very concerned that 50 years from now, the world is going to look on the Stars and Stripes with the same revulsion our generation looked on the swastika. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call real quick. Mo in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you for taking my call, Michael. I was just going to say, I don't want to shift gears. If you're, some of you probably mentioned before, but I watch all your shows, so maybe I missed it. But the Microsoft to Windows 10, just doing a little checking into it after I got off. It was kind of amazing to me, but I'm not up to date like you are on all this technical stuff. But you know, they can if you everything you do on Windows 10, they can turn you agree to have your microphone turned on your computer, and you also they also track your key strokes, just like they used to have the old black box where the FBI would track your keystrokes. So you can be going on to a secure site. And they got your password.
Yeah, they've got everything absolutely backdoored. They're spying on us, and yet yesterday the FBI admitted they can't catch real cyber criminals. The FBI's official recommendation to anybody who's hit with ransomware is go ahead and pay the ransom because we can't do a thing about it. That's the FBI admitting this, which tells us that the NSA is all about watching law-abiding American citizens to steal their business secrets, to steal naked pictures of their girlfriends, sons, daughters, boyfriends, pets, who knows. It doesn't serve a real purpose in protecting our security. In fact, quite the contrary. It's left our infrastructure, our IT infrastructure, wide open because the real bad guys are finding all these back doors built into the system. And that's why we're hearing constantly.
Microsoft is the bad guys. The people I know in IT, they're safe because their IT people have gone in and tweaked it to where Microsoft can't do. You know, they've disabled those features. But the average schmuck, 99.9% of us, we don't realize you could be sitting there in front of a client closing a deal or whatever you're doing, and Microsoft can turn your microphone on.
And then they can sell that information, what you bid on the contract, to your competitor, and the competitor can come in and underbid. The U.S. government was caught doing that at APEC. Listen, need to let you go. We're going to talk more about cybersecurity in hour number 3, but we need to get back to politics. Okay. Now then, Donald Trump is out there with 2 issues that he is talking about. First of all, one of his recent rallies literally filled a sports stadium. And Trump was very unhappy that the corporate media didn't want to show that. So he's posted the photo to his campaign website and his Twitter feed. It's been picked up and shown all over the United States of America. And now all of the United States of America recognize that the corporate media is trying to do to Donald Trump today what they did to Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. Make it look like he's got no support. Nobody's backing him. You know, Trump has to go. We need to get rid of him. And because we know that's what they did to Ron Paul, we recognize it when it's being done to Donald Trump. Now, Trump has taken a shot at Jeb Bush, who's been forced to cut his campaign payroll by 40% and lay off a huge amount of the staff from his campaign. And Trump is saying, with a certain degree of accuracy, here's a guy who wants to run our country. He can't even run his own campaign. Bush is losing badly and embarrassing his family. And that's absolutely true. Now, Donald Trump, in a speech in Sioux City, says he's going to rebound in Iowa on his poll numbers. And I'm not convinced Trump slipped in the polls. And again, like I said in hour number 1, if you go back and you look at the dirty tricks being played by Richard Nixon's committee to re-elect the president, rigging opinion polls was one of their tools to discredit Democrats they wanted out of Nixon's path to re-election. And Hillary Rodham studied all of that when she was working on the Watergate committee. Other polls are showing a different story. Let's see. Story coming out of The Hill. Trump leads Carson by 14 points nationwide. Trump leads by 34 points in latest Massachusetts poll. That sudden reversal in Iowa that everybody seized on is very suspicious. Very, very suspicious. And finally, we have this article over in News with Views about how Ben Carson has teamed up with Al Sharpton now, which is going to be a little embarrassing for many of his supporters. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Quinn in Canada, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon. I am sorry. I'm having difficulty. Public speaking. I must ask you about the Arthur Topham case.
Yes.
I haven't been able to find out who exactly it is that raised a complaint about him on his website.
B'nai B'rith Canada. B'nai B'rith Canada.
There's another one. There's another one that he said that was a serial complainant that was that launched an identical complaint as B'nai B'rith.
Well, they were dogpiling onto him, but the trial has started. It could go on for many months. If Trudeau does in fact go into Bill C-51 and remove that idea that any criticism of Israel's government represents anti-Semitism, then the Topham case should, at that point, be thrown out. Because it's ridiculous to say criticism of Israel's government represents hatred of the Jewish people. That's like trying to defend the actions of the Nazis by saying anybody who complains just hates Germans. It's absurd. It's ridiculous, okay?
But Mr. Topham's website refers to some individual that is not allowed to be named because of a gag order. And I would assume that if I was to say this person's name or even question who he is around here, I might be liable for criminal prosecution. But you are under this sort of jurisdiction.
Okay, we seem to be having problems with our phone connection here because you just got very, very distant. And I'm going to let you go because we're about out of time on this segment here. But yeah, I mean, you know, Israel's supporters are out there. They're complaining to everybody. They're trying to wreck people's careers. And yes, they hide in the dark. They'll get gag orders. They'll get security. They'll use pseudonyms because they don't want people to see what they're doing. Because every single time Israel supporters wreck a career, smear somebody, hammer a server, any of that stuff, it's a public confession that Israel knows the facts are against them. If Israel supporters really believe the truth of what they're saying, they would welcome an open debate. But open debate is absolutely the last thing they want, and that's why they're trying to get us back to this middle-age idea that you can criminalize certain words, certain phrases. You can criminalize criticism of a government. That's tyranny and dictatorship. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, over at naturalnews.com, they've got a very interesting article. And before I get into this article, I want to remind you all of what happened following the first Democratic debate, where the online polls, including those of the corporate media, showed Bernie Sanders has won. The corporate media took their polls down and immediately proclaimed Hillary was the winner. So, Natural News has this article out today. Democratic Party rescinds support for democracy, claims Hillary must be president because that's what the people in charge want. There's a story in the Daily Mail online. The Democratic Party's leadership is heavily female, heavily feminist. Debbie Wasserman Schultz literally put out a dictum. No Democrat is allowed to participate in a debate she has not personally approved. And the Daily Mail is reporting the Democratic National Committee is clearing a path for Hillary Clinton to be its presidential nominee because its upper power echelons are populated with women, according to a female committee member who was in Las Vegas for that first debate. The Democratic Party does not believe in democracy. The Democratic Party does not believe in doing what the people want. Remember in the Democratic primary back in 2012, that absolutely outrageous stunt where the Democratic Party leadership wanted to add a platform about Israel, add a plank about Israel to their platform, and it was voted down overwhelmingly by the Democratic Party's own delegates to their own convention. And the Democratic Party leadership said, no, it sounds to me like it passed. And they just put it in there. And all the delegates are booing and screaming. Now, getting on back to Benghazi, because that is not going away anytime soon. Far from being victorious in the hearings. Actual examination of Hillary's testimony has revealed a lot of really embarrassing things. All the headlines that she won and is looking good are out there for people who didn't actually watch the debates, or rather watch the hearing, or read the transcript.
Just look at the headline, believe what we tell you, and all will be well. That's the way the corporate media operates. We know there's a confirmation of the gun running. There's a confirmation that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama knew it was a deliberate terror attack. It was not a spontaneous riot based on that stupid YouTube video, Innocence of Muslims. They lied to you. And they lied to cover up that it was a deliberate terror attack because they didn't want anybody asking why the terrorists picked that time and location, because that would have tipped off the gun running by the U.S. government to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. And there was also, according to David Petraeus, lover/biographer, a CIA torture dungeon in that facility, which, by the way, and I found this out from Joyce Riley, the consulate in Benghazi was never officially listed as a U.S. consulate at the State Department website. The State Department only listed the consulate in Tripoli. The consulate in Benghazi wasn't even official. It was just a cover for the gun-running torture operations going on there. Now, Ron Paul is out there saying the Benghazi hearings needed a broader focus. And they absolutely did, but they were constrained intentionally. Only look here. Don't look over here. Don't look over there. Look here, like they did with the 9/11 investigation. And it was, the Benghazi committee was underfunded. The U.S. government has spent more money studying why lesbians are fat than they gave to investigate this attack on our consulate. And Ron Paul is right. There should be a broader focus. The gun running needs to be looked into to see how widespread that was and how much of a complete and total fake the war on terror has been. And there's still that open question of whether Hillary Clinton was selling U.S. secrets using her weak private email server as the delivery system and her charitable foundation to collect and launder the payments. Nobody's even asking the question. They want that one to go away. That would definitely destroy Hillary's candidacy, for her to be exposed as a traitor. And again, there are grounds for asking this question, because back in 1995, when Bill Clinton was running for his second term in office, there was the Chinagate scandal. Bill Clinton authorized the sale of highly sensitive U.S. technology with military applications to China over the objections of the Pentagon, the CIA, pretty much everybody. And at the same time, all this money that originated in China began to pour into his re-election campaign through U.S. citizens of Chinese descent. And when they were investigated, they said, yes, we were getting this money from China, including Chinese intelligence. Now, Ron Paul has also come out, well, actually, it's a flashback YouTube video. We have it on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com, where Ron Paul is talking about the CIA drug trafficking, which has also been going on in the background all these years. And so this seems like a good moment to recommend a movie that is currently on cable TV. Claire and I watched it last night on HBO. It's called Kill the Messenger, and it's the story of San Jose Mercury News reporter Gary Webb, who blew the lid off U.S. government drug running in his series of stories called Dark Alliance. And it was a very difficult movie to watch, especially for my wife, after all that we've been through. And the film basically ends with Webb's death from 2 gunshots to the head, which was declared a suicide. Now, the really disgusting part in the story was how Webb's co-workers and friends all acted like subjects in Stanley Milgram's obedience experiment, willing to destroy the career and life of their friend and co-worker because an authority figure told them to. And needless to say, everything Gary Webb reported has since been confirmed many times over by people like Eugene Hassenfuss, Terry Reid, Barry Seal, Sally Denton, Roger Morris, plus all the photos we have on our website of U.S. military forces guarding and protecting Afghanistan's opium poppy fields and shipping the sacks of the raw opium. The biggest drug dealer in the country is the government. Now, former House Speaker Dennis Hastert has pled guilty to structuring in his hush money case. And he pled guilty on the second count. And basically, he was being blackmailed for some kind of sexual misconduct that is still not being discussed. But he was paying off the blackmailer, and then he was lying about it to federal authorities. And it is a reminder that the kind of people who are attracted to these positions of power are not the ones we should allow in there. It is the curse of political power that it attracts the very sort of people who shouldn't be allowed to have it. People who want power, who want wealth, who want to play God with other people's lives, other people's children, want to play empire across the globe and get their pictures on the postage stamps and the coins and statues. Now, next year, actually sooner than that, the Church of Scientology could get its own senator, because Representative David Jolly, who represents Scientology's Mecca, is now running to replace Marco Rubio in the U.S. Senate. And there's another documentary that's been on HBO about the Scientologists called Going Clear. And if you have not seen it, that is a must-see. Those are very scary, dangerous people. All right. Now then, interesting little story. Up in Canada, one of their senators, Patrick Brazeau, has been let off the hook completely on assault and cocaine charges in September. He will not serve any time in jail. He will not have a criminal record. The charge of sexual assault was dropped supposedly due to a lack of evidence. And they're letting this guy walk free. But Arthur Topham is looking at 2 years in Canadian prison for criticizing Israel. Assault, cocaine, you can go free. Criticize Israel, you're going to jail. That is Canada today. That's the state of the dictatorship up there. All right, we're coming up here on our news break. We're going to come back with hour number 3. We're going to be talking about the immigration crisis. It is definitely not going according to the plan, leading to the dropping of borders. Quite the contrary, it's having the opposite effect. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors and the news break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open again, 877-300-7645. Let's talk about this immigration crisis, refugee crisis. Seeing an article over here in the Daily Mail, the end of Schengen. Austria is the latest country to start building a fence to control the flow of aggressive and emotional refugees. Now, Schengen is the word that describes the internal, borderless nature of the European Union. The idea was that the member nations of the European Union didn't have passport border controls internally. If you're a citizen of France, you can just go over the Channel Tunnel train to Great Britain, or you can go back over to Germany, you can go to any of those countries. You don't have to show your papers anywhere. That was part of what gave it the illusion of being a single, united, sovereign entity. But that's in danger, because all of these nations being flooded with these refugees are starting to put up barriers and passport control. Over in Austria, the gun stores are reporting they're sold out of shotguns, because under Austrian gun law, you do need a permit for a small handgun and even a long gun, but shotguns are exempt. You don't need a permit. You can buy a shotgun. And apparently they can't keep them on the shelves over there. See, the Austrians understand you are the last line of defense for your home and loved ones. You cannot count on the police being there on time. They never are. Now, as you know, Obamacare is turning out to be an epic disaster for both its overt purpose of providing affordable health care to Americans and its covert purpose of generating a new surge in tax revenues for our desperately broke government. And right now, there is a lawsuit being prepared by the U.S. House of Representatives. The judge has already said they have standing to sue the President of the United States of America, because Obama has just been writing out checks to prop up all these health insurers and all these Obamacare collectives, whatever you want to call them, and it's not working. The Arches Health Plan up in Utah is collapsing. And they're saying it's because we're not getting the subsidies from the federal government anymore. And as of December 31st of this year, 45,000 Utahns who signed on to their Obamacare-compliant health plan, it's going to disappear. Now, as you know, there has been a big hue and cry over whether or not the forced feeding of hunger-striking prisoners at Guantanamo amounts to torture or not. And here is the situation. There are people in Guantanamo that have been cleared for release by the military tribunal. There are no grounds to hold them any longer. They did nothing to this country. And the government continues to hold them without explanation. And many of these people have gone on hunger strikes to try and force the issue. And the U.S. government straps them into a chair, shoves a tube down into their stomach, and pours in whatever concoction they're pouring in there. And the lawyers for these people are saying this amounts to torture. And there are videos of it. And the Obama administration has been fighting the release of those tapes tooth and nail. And according to this story out of Aletho News, a U.S. District Court judge has rejected the Obama administration's latest attempt to keep these tapes hidden from you, the public, whose taxes paid for all of this. And the judge was very upset by the government's assertion that the system of classification trumps the right to know of the people. We're not talking about military secrets here, or anything that can be justified, classified, other than it's embarrassing. And looking at how hard the Obama administration is fighting this, I would think that simply a force feeding is not going to be that shocking. But remember what I said the other day? The reason the U.S. government is hanging on to these people is because their bodies probably bear scars of far worse things done to them than waterboarding. We know this is so because of one prisoner, Binyam Mohammed, who was released. And he went public, he got to the reporters, and he was willing to show the scars on his body that the U.S. torturers put on there. And so I'm going to speculate here that the reason they do not want to show these tapes of the force feeding is not because of the force feeding itself, but because the tapes also show scars on the bodies of these people who have been cleared for release by the military tribunal and are still being held. That's the only thing that makes any sense at all. Now, speaking of Richard Gage, he's out there touring around with his latest brochure, and it's a very nice brochure. He sent me a stack of them, and I'm handing them out to architects and engineers and anybody else who's interested on the subject. He's had his latest summit, as you were in Las Vegas, got 25 new structural engineers to sign the petition demanding another investigation, which will be ignored by the U.S. government. But the pressure is still building, and more people understand. We were lied to about 9/11. The fine details don't even matter anymore. It is time for the American people to confront the reality that we live under a government that lies to us about everything, that we are the most lied to people on the face of the earth. We're lied to more by our government than the former citizens of the Soviet Union. And we have to decide what we're going to do about that. Now, the other day, we were talking about these very tacky Halloween costumes Walmart had. One was an IDF soldier, and the other was a very racially offensive Arab costume that included a plastic nose that just stuck out and hooked down. And it triggered a huge expression of disgust, first of all, because of what the IDF is currently doing to the Palestinians, and second of all, because the Arab depiction is clearly insulting and stereotypical. Walmart, to their credit, has pulled these products off of their shelves. And then to remind us all of just how tacky things can be, there was a picture, and we've got it on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. Over in this Israeli father has two sons, and he made a costume for them representing the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center with airplanes crashing into them. He thinks, oh, this is fun. This is what passes for humor in Israel these days. Now, we are getting word that Russia is interested in joining Nicaragua's new canal project. As you know, the original Panama Canal is very narrow. It's subject to erosion. They're trying to enlarge the locks a little bit. Right now, this is a constraint on shipbuilding, whether it's these giant, boxy passenger cruise ships or aircraft carriers. If they don't fit through the Panama Canal, that's a problem. Nicaragua has been planning to build a new canal that will accommodate much larger ships, will be able to take in the super cargo ships, the really gigantic container cargo ships, super tankers, will probably trigger a boom in the size of passenger ships and warships. Russia is now expressing interest in helping to fund the project. That there are economic interests in Russia that would like to be a part of this new canal project, which would be a good thing for shipping all over the world. All right, we're coming up here on a commercial break. When we come on back, I'm going to be talking about education, the renewed push to demonize criticism of Israel as Jew hate, and some other stories from the world of science and health and engineering and some other good things like that. So we'll be back after these few words. Hello, hi America. Welcome back to the show here. And over the break, Fox News was running an interview with one of our forces in Iraq. And the guy is saying, yeah, we're in combat. We've been in combat. We carry guns. We get combat pay. We got a combat patch. Yeah, I don't care what they're calling it at home. We're in combat. They lied to us again. Ooh, imagine my shock. All righty. Now, yesterday we were making fun of a math test from the Common Core curriculum. And the problem was to find the solution to 3 times 5 using the repetitive addition method, which is how they're teaching kids to solve multiplication. And the student had put down 5 plus 5 plus 5 equals 15, and the teacher marked it wrong, saying that the student should have done 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 equals 15. Let's do it the longest, most obfuscated way possible. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're crippling the next generation of Americans by teaching them how to solve problems with these obfuscated, ridiculous methods, so that these kids are going to grow up not able to really think efficiently, to be able to analyze and look at what's going on around them. It's deliberate. Now, when I was a kid, we memorized the multiplication tables for everything from 1 to 10. That was it. That's how we learned multiplication. 3 times 5 is 15. We just remembered it. Fast, efficient, simple. They don't want that. And it is having an effect, apparently, because over at ADN.com, they're reporting that for the first time, this year, for the first time since 1990, the mathematical skills of American students have dropped. So over at Common Core, they're saying, yes, we've succeeded. We have crippled their ability to think effectively and efficiently, which is what we wanted to do. We don't want Americans that can think. What an inconvenience that is. We want Americans who believe what they're told to believe. Now, as you know, there's been this big debate out at the University of California with the regents over this move by Israel's groups. And it's nationwide. It's all over the nation, but this focus is out at the University of California, to basically have rules that say criticism of the actions of the government of Israel represent anti-Semitism and Jew hate and hate speech and have to be penalized, criminalized. You're not allowed to criticize Israel. You've got a First Amendment right to freedom of speech. You can criticize your own government. You can criticize the management of the school. You can criticize anything in the world except Israel. Now, if your freedom of speech has got limits on it like that, it's not freedom of speech, it's permitted speech. You can speak freely about anything we give you permission to talk about, and you do not have permission to talk about Israel. And it's a ridiculous idea. It's a ridiculous principle. Dismissing criticism of Israel's government as hatred of the Jews makes as much sense as dismissing criticism of the Nazis by claiming the complainer is anti-German. And it is ridiculous in any other context, but Israel's gotten away with this. And as we reported, I think it was on Monday, this is happening in colleges all across the United States of America. It's very well organized. It's very well funded. And as it becomes more and more widely known that this is what's going on, even more people are coming out to say, yeah, we're being harassed. We're, losing our teaching jobs. We're losing our regular jobs. There's a campaign of terror being directed against anybody who criticizes the government of Israel. Now, the story over here in Common Dream, same thing. Universities face another push to criminalize speech criticizing Israel. Now, the reason we have a First Amendment is not to protect canvases with animal poo hanging in the art galleries or naked ladies sliding around shiny brass poles. The reason the Constitution and the Bill of Rights recognize our right to free speech is so that we can criticize government without fear of reprisal and consequences. And Israel, by this campaign on our universities, is not only showing the hand of the tyrant, they are showing that Israel, in point of fact, does not recognize the right to freedom of speech. They want you silent and obedient, and that's it. Now, very alarmingly, Ben Carson is signing on to this. And he was saying that if he becomes president, he will use the U.S. Department of Education to police speech on college campuses. And Carson is saying we're going to monitor our institutions of higher education for extreme political bias. And if we find it, we'll deny federal funding. So Carson, running for president, does not support the First Amendment right to freedom of speech and seems to be well and truly on board with this program to turn our universities into rigid enforcers of the status quo and obedience to Almighty Israel. Now, there's another report came out over in Raw Story, and they're talking about Max Blumenthal is finally picking up on something we've said a long time. This militarization of the U.S. police, this explosion in police brutality is directly attributable to all of our police departments being trained by Israeli security companies. Max Blumenthal calls it the Israelification of the American police, and he points to the tactics deployed against the Occupy protesters, which were far more appropriate to counter terrorism operations than simply policing nonviolent protests. It didn't get violent until the cops showed up. And yes, we can see it all around the country. The American police departments are now starting to treat the American people the way the IDF treats the Palestinians. And if you look at how the Palestinians are being treated today, that is our future. So, now there's another interesting little article came out on the Common Sense Show. The next tool of tyranny and enslavement is coming from your pastor and FEMA. And the article is talking about this growing interlink between the government and institutions of religion going all the way back to George Bush's faith-based initiatives, where government money for social activity was being funneled out to churches, and in exchange the churches were expected to constantly cite Romans 13 to say, yes, you should always do what the government tells you to do. God wills it. God wills it. And many of the nation's clergy have been trained on how to keep Americans calm in the face of rising injustice and tyranny. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to talk about what's going on out in St. Louis. Now, if you will remember, yesterday we reported on a report from the World Health Organization, which is acknowledging, finally, that chronic, long-duration exposure to even low levels of radiation will lead to cancer and illness. Contrary to Ann Coulter's claim that a little radiation is good for you, the World Health Organization is saying no, there's no degree of radiation, ionizing radiation, that's safe. And they're starting to discover problems with non-ionizing radiation like the terahertz machines, but that's another story. So these people in St. Louis are dealing with a major problem, and it's not new because apparently that area of St. Louis has had a much higher than normal per capita instance of cancers, leukemias. And it all goes back to this dumping of radioactive waste from the U.S. atomic bomb program. And this stuff was just dumped into the ground in a landfill. Now, at the time, it was out in the boonies, but the city reached out and surrounded it. Nobody told people what was there. The dumping had been done secretly, with the approval of the federal government. People who were asking what was going on were told, none of your business. And the U.S. government and the company involved, Mallinckrodt, said the wastes were not radioactive or otherwise dangerous. Now we know they are. And the residents of St. Louis, that particular neighborhood, were dying from cancer in record numbers. Now, we are getting reports from a couple of sources, including INFOWARS, that they're beginning to detect an increase in the radioactive material coming out of that landfill area, suggesting that that underground fire that's been burning for a very long time is starting to warm the waste. And we're getting reports that they've already put out an evacuation plan. We're going to have a major radiological disaster right in the American heartland. And it underscores something. The U.S. government's been dumping all of this stuff all over the place. There was a radioactive waste dump out in Nevada, spontaneously caught on fire, which means there's fission going on down there, or very heavy decay, enough to get the materials to ignite. Now, the smoke has stopped pouring out. It's been declared that the fire is over and everybody can go back to gambling and whatever else it is they do over there in Nevada. But this stuff is everywhere. We've got WIP, we've got Hanford, we've got this facility in Nevada, we've got this dump under St. Louis. At the end of World War II, the U.S. Navy dumped huge amounts of unexploded ordnance, chemical weapons, just in the ocean. If you get a navigator's chart of the Hawaiian Islands that's used for actual fishing, shipping, commercial traffic, there are areas drawn on the map. Do not dredge or run nets here. Big, huge pile of very dangerous stuff. And the problem is, salt water is very corrosive. And it's only a matter of time before the containers for this stuff finally rupture and start to leak. But when the government gets into a war fever, their attitude is, we're going to make this stuff, and when the war is over, we're just going to dump it. It's not our problem. We've won the war. It's time for a party. And all over planet Earth, there is this growing accumulation of all these highly toxic materials, radioactive, chemical weapons, biological weapons, and yes, they're decaying, but they're still dangerous. They just sort of pretend it's no big deal. And as we found out in St. Louis, they won't tell you if you're living over any of that. Not too long ago, I finally found out. We've been living in this house here for a little over 5 years now. A little while ago, we found out there are 2 depleted uranium artillery shells somewhere in the hill above us. The result of an accident that took place in Pearl Harbor that fired 2 artillery rounds up here into the hill. They're depleted uranium, and depleted uranium is still dangerous. It's still radioactive. We don't know exactly where they are. I've wandered around a little bit with a radiation meter, but can't find them. But that stuff is still up there. And the government just doesn't really care. If you get cancer, well, that's good for the economy. You have to go to the cancer treatment thing. You'll have to spend more of your money, which doesn't work when we don't have any money. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Keith in Montana. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I was just going to refer you that, when you said that it's all over. You remember back in 1991, Camp Villa, when that explosion happened over there and all those depleted uranium weapons went off. But anyway, they exported from Kuwait. Kuwait made them clean up that entire camp there from all those explosions there. And there's 150 some odd rail cars brought over to Vancouver and then shipped over to Boise, Idaho. And the latter part of that was that the Boise plant also didn't know what they were actually storing.
You know, something that has been rather interesting is trying to find actual maps of cancer incidents in the U.S. You can get all kinds of summaries and totals and everything, but you can't get a map of where cancer patients are living, down to the resolution of neighborhoods or even towns and villages. The most resolution they'll give you is an entire state, which doesn't tell you anything.
You know, I think it's interesting too, Mike. I don't watch that much TV just for Perry Mason because it's only the last vestige of justice that was served for the little guy, you know. But anyway, you're inundated with commercial after commercial of radon gas and how it's the leading causes of lung cancer and stuff, you know. But you're right. None of that stuff is out there that shows the actual health hazards of anything that's around you.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing down in was it Arizona with the Native American tribal town there where they mined all that uranium.
Yeah.
And their entire they're I mean, it's government mismanagement, and of course, who cares?
No, it's
right?
government apathy. It's government apathy. The reason these cancer cluster maps are classified is because they don't want you figuring out what may be causing cancer, which is a runaway epidemic in the modern age. It was very, very rare in medieval and ancient times. So, you know, cancer is definitely caused by something in our modern lifestyle. They don't want you to know what it is because it affects somebody's financial interest. And I remember, I literally, huge amount of research, I finally located a cancer incident map for the island of Oahu, which showed cancer clusters out by those giant high-powered ultra-long-wave ELF radio transmitters out on the leeward side, which was not entirely unexpected. But that information about exactly where the cancer patients are, you know, got their cancers, that's like classified or something. You can't find it anywhere. It's like the numbers about how many police officers wrongfully murder Americans. They don't think you need to know that.
Yeah, I was going to state too, Mike, that I had done a whole bunch of research on that. Those NBC units are called nuclear biochemical things. When I was doing this, when the but when the Iraq War started after 2003, that the U.S. had deployed over 75 of those NBC units all over Iraq there. And, of course, this included Kuwait. And they were monitoring the emissions from that Camp Doa that had that massive explosion, and the radiation spikes that were over 20 miles away that were being registered by that. And then it comes right back to the same thing that Kuwait.
Well, you know, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're hitting a commercial break here. The EPA has announced 2/3 of their radiation monitors in the U.S. have now been shut off. Guess something may be happening they don't want you to know about. Keith's going to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call. We're going to come back. We got one more call we're going to take for today's show and then finish up with some other news. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're just getting word that the House of Representatives has passed this budget and debt deal. And they're all saying it prevents a default here. And one of the things that's in there is no debt ceiling from now through March of 2017. The government can borrow as much as it wants to borrow without any restrictions whatsoever. Who are they borrowing it from? Your future family. Your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. That's who's going to have to pay this all back, unless the economy implodes, which is certainly possible. All right, we're going to take one more phone call today. Andrea in Oklahoma. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I've shared this once before, but it's always good to share it again. Tampa, Florida, the university there had 3 concrete ponds, and they filled it with hydra, with water and everything, and then they started they had a triple smelter burner there next to it, and they had a conveyor belt constantly rolling, and they started filling these ponds with highly nuclear waste, highly radioactive chemicals and things that they couldn't get rid of anyway. And it was the experiment. They had that conveyor belt. The hydra grows so fast, about 12 inches a day, and it was absorbing all this nuclear waste. And then they'd have it on these conveyor belts, let it dry out, and then put it in the triple burner smelters, and they were able to render it harmless. If you can.
Well, I don't believe that, because I mean, you're talking about the process of bioaccumulation, and yes, ground covering plants are a recognized tool to clean up a nuclear accident. They were certainly using it all around Chernobyl. I presume they're using it around Fukushima. But putting this dried up plant matter in any kind of an incinerator doesn't make it safe and non-radioactive. What it will do is it'll pull it down into a smaller volume of highly radioactive material that can be disposed of someplace else. But it doesn't actually make it safe. And in fact, if you concentrate it too much, you run the risk of spontaneous fission. And again, we're finding that, you know, the carbon Nazis are out there screaming that the Earth is under threat from our plastic bags. And meanwhile, we're starting to realize there's all this dangerous accumulation from almost a century of modern warfare that's under our feet, in our water, in the air. I mean, if you've got the equipment, you can still, in the air, detect radioisotopes from all the atomic bomb tests in the Pacific. It's still floating around the planet. And that's the real threat to our lives, because it causes cancer, it causes all kinds of other problems. But they want you thinking about plastic bags in a smaller car is going to save the entire world. Anyway, Andrea, I got to let you go. We got just a few minutes left here, and I want to finish up the show with a couple of things. Now, Fox News, Donald Trump has now come out expressing his lack of confidence in that Iowa poll that showed him trailing. And it's based on, in part, being the only poll that had that result. And apparently some of Trump's people in Iowa were going around double-checking, and they're saying what they're finding doesn't match what was reported. Remember what I said. One of Richard Nixon's dirty tricks that he used was to rig the opinion polls. Now in Iowa, and by the way, Iowa has a very long record of bad behavior when it comes to elections. When they get to the straw polls, there have been a couple of scandals there, because in order to vote in the straw poll, you have to have a ticket to get in. And the candidate with the most money can buy the most tickets and give them out to people to go on in and vote for them. It's not a true representation of the will of the people. It's just another way of letting the people with the most money carry the day. That's what's going on. Alrighty, let's see. Grab a couple of stories about computers. The banks are now getting ready to move to automated teller machines with biometric verification, including eye scans. That's the good news. The bad news is hackers have already found a simple way to fool the iris scanners. And no, it's not digging the eye out of your skull and holding it up on a pen. They can do it with a high-resolution photo of your face. And they can fool this iris biometric security system. I think we need to go back to human bank tellers who know who you are. Now, the Mark and Spencer website had to be shut down because people were logging in and find themselves looking at other people's accounts, personal details, buying history, banking stuff. And apparently, Marks and Spencer had started a new program called the Sparks Reward Cards. Not enough testing, major goof. People were logging in and they were being connected to somebody else's account. Let's see. Here we go. This is something that we can finish the show on. As you know, there's been a growing concern over the excesses of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which has been interpreted by the government, by industry, to say that you cannot go in to your own computer equipment. It's a violation of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. You can't go in there, can't hack it, can't adjust it. Well, it turns out the Library of Congress, which administers copyright law, has come out saying that the Digital Millennium Copyright Act doesn't actually say that. The purpose of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act is to criminalize you opening up the software on your car, tablet, smart TV, and copying it off to give to somebody else or sell.
But in point of fact, the law does not prohibit you from going on in and playing with your own property. Now, of course, this is going to panic everybody at the NSA, because everyone's going to start tearing into these appliances looking for all the NSA back doors. And I think that's the reason the government was taking this position. You're not allowed to tinker with the software on things you own because we might find how they're spying on us. But the Library of Congress is saying, no, it's a crime only if you hack into this software for the purpose of passing it on to another party. If you're just a weekend gearhead working on your car and you want to tear out the embedded computer system and go with one that's open source, and yes, they are out there now, you are within the law to do it. It is not a crime for you to dig into the software on anything that you own. It's only a crime if you share it with somebody else. So, that makes a little more common sense here. By the way, if you are a customer of Aquafina brand bottled water, and you thought it came from a mountain spring, you're in for a disappointment. Pepsi has admitted the Aquafina brand bottled water is just ordinary tap water from the city water system, and yes, they run it through some more filters and add some minerals to improve the taste, but it's not mountain water. It's water that's been through the public water system, which means it probably includes recycled pharmaceuticals that the public water systems can't take out. Pepsi is going to change their label to indicate this water is from a public water source, so that hopefully this will end the confusion. Well, the confusion was there because of the deceptive packaging and advertising that made it sound like this was fresh, clear mountain spring water from hand-selected glaciers that have been sitting there for the last 1,000,000 years, blah, 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 blah. And finally, here's a big one. Somebody leaked out a memo from Eli Lilly that proves they knew Prozac triggered increases in suicidal thought and aggression. And they hid it for years. Not only that, it had settled a lawsuit on that very issue and kept that under wraps. So now we know Eli Lilly knew Prozac was triggering suicidal and violent thoughts, but you don't need to know that. Just take your pills and give us your money, and that's all that really matters. My goodness here. Apparently the star witness in a case pitting rainforest villagers against a multinational oil giant has admitted to lying under oath to help Chevron avoid paying a $9 billion judgment. The corruption goes on forever. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here. I've got to get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay smart, stay informed, stay skeptical. Share what you know with everyone that you know. We're trying to stop this world war before it goes nuclear. We'll see you tomorrow. Aloha, America.